want to start. Good morning, everyone. Welcome all. After our first session on the current approaches to STI policy making in the context of SDG, which took place last week, Monday, and last Wednesday's session on STI policy instruments, design and implementation, we would like to focus today on STI policy monitoring, evaluation, and learning for development. In this session, we focus on the need and the function of monitoring, the difference between monitoring and evaluation, and the importance of learning from the efforts that we undertake to monitor and to evaluate, and to better understand the instruments that we use and the effectiveness of the instruments, how to make better use of public funds and make sure that we actually spend the investments correctly in order to foster development and decrease inequalities. My name is Mindel van der Laar. I'm working for UN-IATT, which is in Maastricht in the Netherlands, and I'll be the moderator for today. But we have, like in the previous sessions, a large group of speakers, a variety of speakers from various institutions that will help us guide through the materials of today. So let me quickly introduce them to you. We will start this morning with a monitoring session. And in the monitoring session, we will have speakers Hugo Hollanders, who is a senior researcher with an expertise in innovation statistics from UN-IATT. The second speaker will be Diego Chavarro, who is a consultant, and he also works at the Scholarly Communication Lab and Simon Fraser University in Canada. The third speaker will be Ms. Jiawei Han, who works as an associate researcher for the Chinese Academy of Science and Technology for Development. And we stop the monitoring session with an interview with Mr. Abiodun Egbe-Tokun, who currently works for the Montfort University, but previously was working for the National Center for Technology and Management, NASATEM in Nigeria. After the monitoring session, we will move to an evaluation session, and there we will start with Ms. Teresa Farinha, who is a researcher at UN-IATT, and she's followed up again by Diego Chavarro, who will talk also about the need for funding of evaluation policies, and we have a second interview with Mr. Nazim Mustafa, who works for the Statistical and Policy Research Unit in the Center for Science, Technology and Innovation Indicators, CHESTI, in South Africa. And then we end today with dealing a little bit more with the challenges of monitoring evaluation. And we start that session with a presentation from Mr. Chuck Daniels, who works at the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex. Then we will have an experience sharing moment with Mr. Lukovi Seke, who works for the African Union Development Agency as a principal program officer in the office of STI. And we close with two presentations, one from Mr. Dimo Kalowski, who you've seen already in the previous sessions, who is an economist at UNCTAD dealing with STI policy, doing policy reviews, STI policy reviews, and providing trainings. And the last speaker will be Mr. Fernando Santiago Rodriguez, who you've also seen in the previous sessions, and he works as an industrial policy officer at UNIDO in Vienna, Austria. So the program is packed, and for sake of time, I will monitor quite closely that we'll be able to move forward quickly. Next slides basically quickly introduce to you what we are going to do. But like in the previous two sessions, we will always also use the Mentimeter tool to engage with the audience. And we also would like to invite the audience to put your questions and comments in the chat. All of the speakers that are not speaking at that particular moment will be helping us in providing answers to your questions in the chat. And by doing so, we really hope to actually pay attention to all of your requests while we are continuing the program as well. The program will be taped. All the materials that we compile, both the tapes, but also the slides, the links that we add in the chat to additional resources, we will compile all of that at a later stage, potentially next week. And we will make sure that this is available on the IATT website, so you will not have to ask individually for additional resources. We will put in the chat a number of times the link where you will find all the resources after we complete this session. Last comment is that at the end of the session, we will also provide you with an evaluation link, and we kindly ask you to then already inform us what you appreciated and what you would like to receive more in terms of services from the IATT team. With that said, I would like to start, and I think we're going to start with a Mentimeter question. So let me stop sharing my screen, and then we will start engaging with the audience. Zhengmei, can you pick it up?
Can you see it?
Those of you that were here in the previous rounds know the exercise, but in case you forgot, you can either scan the QR code that is now on the screen, but we also posted the link to Mentimeter in the chat, and that will allow you to provide you with your experiences, your questions, your assumptions, and your needs in the Mentimeter. And I see that there's already a number of responses coming in, so which is nice. Let's see what the question is. The question is, are you involved in the monitoring and evaluation of STI policy, either in your institution or in your country? And we see a full 100% of no's right now. But I do have to say that the responses are coming in as we go. So let's see how this is developing. We now see that the no's are getting a little bit less dominant. And the dominant one is now, yes, I'm involved as a matter of standardization procedure mandated by the organization. So that's actually the most appreciated one, that doing monitoring and evaluation is institutionalized in your organization. But I also see that there's a third of the organizations or individuals joining the chat still not engaged in monitoring and evaluation. Before I give the floor to Hugo, let's do the second question. I think this question gives us an indication that there's a need to understand better what monitoring and evaluation is. So let us find out, what do you think is the most important reason why we engage in monitoring STI policies? There's the responses coming in. So Hugo, pay attention. This is the intro to your talk. Do you want to pick up and start reporting on the findings?
Well, I could. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everyone. I think actually I'm quite pleased to see the results. Because in my view, why do you monitor STI policies? To measure impact and also to guide policy development. So when I see that options A and E get a decent share of the answers, but of course everyone can have different expectations or different needs from a monitoring exercise. But it's nice that I see a bit of variety. That also means that we all have something to learn from today's sessions.
Exactly. So I think the first focus of the sessions is to make clear what is the difference between monitoring and evaluation. And with that, I propose that we stop with the Mentimeter now and we give the floor to you, Hugo, to get started on the monitoring session.
Okay. Okay, good. Hello again. Amanda already introduced me, so let's go straight on to to what I'm planning to say about monitoring science, technology, and innovation. First of all, so why is monitoring and evaluation important? I think we just already saw on the Mentimeter questions that we have all have different kind of expectations and different needs. To briefly go into like what's the difference between the two, I think evaluation is more of a kind of an exercise where you try to better understand how things are taking place, why things are taking place, where they are taking place, and who is doing them. Whereas the monitoring is also about trying to see like how much has been done or how much still needs to be done, how fast have things developed, or how fast should certain events develop. Important for the monitoring and evaluation is that this is based, that these are evidence-based analysis and evaluations. For this, we need statistical data. You want to build your analysis on hard statistical data, where you address certain policy objectives, productivity, could be scientific excellence. And for that, we need a well-designed selection of indicators. Indicators, metrics, sometimes we also refer to them as variables, but let's call them for now, let's call them indicators. And what you need baseline indicators, which will tell you like, where am I today? And also targets, where would you like to be 1 week from now, 1 month from now, 1 year from now. So having baseline indicators and targets, it's important as it helps you to better track improvements or changes over time, which can then help you to identify, for example, which policies have worked, which policies have not been that effective, and if you should have a kind of a shift in your policy mix in your country. To take as an example, for example, if you look at the National Innovation System, which is a black box, well, it's still a black box. Important, for example, is to know what is going into this box, input indicators, and what is coming out of it. For innovation, important input indicators are related to your research and development activities. How much do you spend on it? How many people are involved? The presence of R&D infrastructure. You can also look at the composition, the presence of R&D in the business sector, at universities, within research institutes. The research and development activities are then being processed in your innovation system. Innovation can take place in the business sector by private firms. It can also take place in the public sector. It can also take place in the informal sector, and that will result in outputs. For example, you will have a higher share of firms that say that they innovate. You will have an increased output in the number of patents, on the number of trademarks, scientific publications, etc. So you go from input to process your innovation system, or replace it by science, technology, and innovation system to outputs. So we need a wide range of indicators, of metrics, to be able to measure, to monitor developments in science, technology, and innovation. For scientific performance, we usually use information on scientific publications, the number of scientific publications, but for example, also a breakdown into different science fields. Also important to know, for example, are publications done by one person only, in collaboration with others, and where are these others, in your own country or also in other countries. We want to look also at the quality of your scientific performance of publications. That's usually measured by using citations. So how often is a publication mentioned in other scientific publications? We look at technological performance, as already mentioned, at expenditures, but also the funding for research and development. So not only like how much is being spent, but also where is the funding coming from? Is it the business sector itself which is funding its R&D expenditures, or is the funding, for example, coming from the government sector? And it's particularly this interaction where other sectors are funding part of the R&D done, for example, with the business sector also funding part of the R&D in the higher education sector. You can also see patterns of collaboration, of knowledge flows. We look at patents, applications, grants, intellectual property, so that also includes trademarks, industrial designs, and more. And for innovation performance, we usually use data or statistics coming from innovation surveys. So surveys which are run, for example, by the statistical office in your country, where they directly address firms, asking them about their innovation activities. If they innovate, what kind of innovations they have, the difficulties they encounter to innovate, etc. So we have, say, three broad fields: scientific, technological, innovation. I think also relevant is to understand that you have different types of indicators. We have simple indicators. For example, 2% of your gross domestic product is spent on research and development, or 50% of the firms in your country have introduced an innovation. Useful, but for improving policies, it's better to move to complex indicators, where we try to have a better understanding, for example, by not only looking at like if 1 out of 2 firms innovate, but we want to know the share of firms that innovate and that have performed their own research and development, so which have in-house capabilities to develop something new, and which are also active on the global market. So you combine different variables to come up with, say, a more granular breakdown of a simple indicator, by being able to break down, for example, the share of innovative firms. And then we also have composite indicators. And composite indicators, you see that they're used very often in scoreboards, for example, the Global Innovation Index, where you use a wide variety of indicators. In the Global Innovation Index, more than 80, and you aggregate everything, you summarize everything into one composite index. That's a composite indicator. And it is used for example, if you want to rank countries, or just to get, say, the interest of policymakers into a particular topic. The topic of, say, science, technology, and innovation. Producing scoreboards, producing indexes helps in putting something on the map. Also relevant is that as we also want to compare results between countries, that we follow international guidelines, how to collect such data, such indicators. For R&D, it's the Frascati manual from the OECD, which provide guidelines for collecting data on R&D by statistical offices. And for innovation, we have the Oslo manual, which was published in 2018. One important point, of course, if we want to monitor and we want to be able to compare between countries, we need access to data. And lack of data, I think, is a real issue, a real challenge. This is a map which is using data from the UNESCO Institute for Statistics on the research and development spending as a share of GDP. And we see that for many countries, data are not available, in particular for many countries in Africa. And the R&D indicator is one of the, say, most used indicators when it comes to monitoring science, technology, and innovation. And if you don't have data for this indicator, it makes it more difficult to know what's going on in your country, and also to know how your country is doing compared to other countries. So it's important that the right kind of statistics are going to be collected that can be used to feed into the monitoring and evaluation exercise. Once you start collecting data, I think it's also important to keep in mind, for what do we need these data? And I think we need the data to be able to design better policies. And for that, you need to have differentiated indicators. And I take one example here. When I look at innovation in private enterprises, firms can innovate in a wide variety of different ways. Some firms develop something new, they innovate in-house, they do it themselves, building on their own in-house capacities. Others do this in collaboration with other organizations, could be private firms, can be universities, can be public research organizations. And you have also firms which do not innovate, or which do not develop the innovation themselves, but they go out, see what's available on the market. If they identify something that is relevant for them, they will purchase this and then implement this into their own production process. These different types of how you innovate require different capabilities. And these different capabilities will benefit from different types of policy support. So instead of, say, collecting and publishing on, say, more simple indicators as the percentage of innovative firms, I think it's more relevant to break down these simple indicators and have more differentiated indicators where you identify and differentiate between different types of innovating firms, which will help policymakers to design better policies. I've been working on this for more than 20 years using data for European countries, but I take here an example using data for South Africa, work done by STI, where they have used data from the innovation survey to classify the firms based on whether they operate in a foreign market or not, whether their product innovations are new to the market or only new to the firm, and who developed these innovations. And we can then see that there are 5 types of different firms, of different innovating firms, with a higher share of firms for the international modifiers, 34% of firms. And well, you can see the percentages on the screen. It's not the idea that one type of innovating firm is better than the other type of innovating firm. They just innovate in a different way. And it's important because it will help you. And I think I refer here to a policy brief from SESTI from January this year, where you can link these different types of innovating firms, which you can see in the left-hand column. And if you go from technology intensity, which goes from high to low, you can see that these different types of innovating firms meet different barriers. For some, cost and market barriers are more important. For other, knowledge and institutional factors are more important. And then you can identify which kind of policy interventions would be best suited to, say, promote innovation or innovation activities for each of these 5 types of innovating firms. Where we can see, for example, that for the new-to-market international innovators and the new-to-market domestic innovators, having policies promoting competition, intellectual property policy regulation, policies on venture and seed capital are relevant to address the barriers that these firms face for them to innovate more or innovate more efficiently. And well, I'm not going to read out all of the different examples. You can look at the screen, and the presentation will also be shared. But if you, for example, go all the way down to the adopters, so these are firms which do not develop something themselves. They just go out and purchase what's available on the market. There you can see that, for example, information exchange, soft tools like campaigns are very important. So you should not try to promote these firms by, say having R&D policies, because these firms do not do R&D and they would not benefit from such policies. But these firms would benefit from a better access to available information. So the information exchange, and also, for example, to provide them with policies on skills and education to upgrade the workforce, which will also benefit these adopters. I think I came to the end of my presentation. I'm even 1 minute short. So back to you, Mindel.
Thank you, Hugo. Let me give the floor then to Diego, who will follow up with providing some examples of monitoring more in the African context. Diego, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And can you see my presentation already?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot also to Hugo for that presentation, and I would like to take it from there and try to to ground that discussion on the African context. Basically, the idea is, okay, we don't have many of the most science and technology related indicators for some African countries. However, we do have some indicators. The question is, what can we do with those indicators, and how can we get access to those indicators? So what I'm going to present here is basically a review of innovation scoreboards with data for African countries. And this is based on a project that was funded by the FCDO, in which there was an important African institution involved, ACTS Kenya. The idea was to gather indicators, understand the quality of these indicators, and try to also understand the ways in which we can use these indicators. Yeah. So the first thing that we did was trying to collect data from freely available sources. Why freely available sources? Because we know some of the indicators are behind paywalls, and we wanted to understand, the extent to which we could capture the characteristics of a national innovation system by using freely available sources. So the first thing in our process was to go and retrieve the World Science and Technology Innovation data from different databases. So we searched mainly in the World Bank, in the United Nations, and in the Economic Forum, and many other places in which we could get access to those indicators. Specifically, we were interested in time series as well, because we know that understanding any national innovation system relies on time, because this is a tool to understand progress or the evolution of a national innovation system. So then we downloaded this data, we tried to get all this data organized, and then we merged all these databases. And that was a challenging task because we know these indicators come from different data sources in different formats. And so we had to pre-process all this data. It included things as removing null values, remove duplicated values, but also standardized country names, standardize also the indicators so that they are comparable. So I just wanted to mention this because in comparing countries and in using this data from different countries, we usually do not acknowledge the importance of data pre-processing and data gathering, and that is a very, very huge task. However, what is interesting is that now we can get access to this data. So if we develop the right skills, we can use this data to steer science and technology policies. And then once you have that, then of course you can do some feature engineering. So you can create the statistics that Hugo was talking about, and you can merge the statistics, you can group them, you can aggregate them in different ways, and you can also, importantly, measure the quality of these data sources. So basically, what we explored was around 15 data sources, and we got to 333 global indicators available in these data sources. Now, you would question what is the relation between these indicators and science and technology. I mean, for that we had to build a framework. As Hugo was saying, one very common framework to use is the logic framework, which you can see here on the left. So the idea is that you have inputs that you transform into outputs and impacts. So you have some indicators that are enablers that allow STI to happen. You have inputs such as scientific personnel. You have linkages such as collaborations. You have outputs such as papers and patents. And then what you want to achieve is some impact, so some change in the real world, some change for the better in specifically grand societal challenges or things like that. So that's one way to look at it. But we also wanted to understand, who is involved in these processes. And so we tried to identify different actors within the national innovation system, which, in some cases, as Hugo was saying, is a black box. So we tried to unpack that innovation system into different actors. And what you see here on the columns is an identification of some of the actors that interact within the innovation system. So brokers and suppliers, education and training organizations, financial organizations, firms in the formal sector, multiple actors, because some of these indicators actually apply to many of the actors, non-profit institutions, or science and technology innovations, etc. One of those, which is important, is the users and consumers. So we try to map all these indicators to a broad understanding of national innovation systems, and we cross these two variables. And we wanted to know how many of the indicators were available for these actors and this logical framework. So basically, some of the conclusions from this analysis, you can see that many of the indicators are concentrated on state institutions and multiple actors. Inputs and enablers are the most measured dimensions, so what is required for innovation to happen. But there is a limited representation of indicators for linkages, so how institutions collaborate, and outputs, which is one of the most important is one of the most important variables to understand how is a national innovation system performing. And then, of course, we have a limited representation of factors in the national innovation system, such as users, so who is using the technology, non-profit institutions, and financial organizations and brokers. So even though we have all these indicators, this is done at the global level, we have still a lot of room for improvement because we don't understand what these actors are doing in terms of the indicators available. But anyway, so you have these indicators, what can you do with them? With those indicators, we build different profiles for different countries. And what I'm showing here is an example of Rwanda. So just to take one African country. And with these indicators, what you can do is, for instance, comparing the availability of indicators. So if you go to the logical framework, how many indicators are per each dimension of that framework, you have the number of indicators available in Rwanda and the number of indicators available in the STI scoreboard. So you could see, how many of the indicators, how well the country is positioned to measure each one of these aspects. But you can also, for instance, identify the best performing indicators for a country. So again, organized by the logical framework here, you can see that some of these indicators appear to be, the best performing for that country. And if you have those indicators, at least you can say, okay, we are strong on these kind of capabilities. But there are other ways, of course, many multiple ways to use these indicators. So one way to use these indicators is to compare a country to other countries or aggregations of countries. Now, we don't go for a suggestion of rankings here because some of the indicators are problematic in terms of the missing values and of the quality. However, we can decompose the indicators and in general see, for instance, how much they perform in the different dimensions. So what you see here is a radar plot that tries to compare Rwanda to other countries, high-income countries, low-income countries, lower middle-income countries, Africa. And we see that in some of these dimensions, output indicators, linkages indicators, etc., in some of these dimensions, Rwanda actually performs very well as compared to high-income countries, not in other dimensions. So the idea is here to add some complexity to the analysis of indicators, but not only showing one dimension in which you rank all the countries, but trying to give more information to countries to understand where they are strong, where they need some more support, etc. There's another way to look at these indicators, and the idea here is how similar is my country to other indicators, to other countries in the world. So what we did was a type of clustering analysis, trying to show, in this case, the similarities of countries in terms of their indicator performance. So what you see here in green, in the dark green, is the countries that, in terms of those indicators, are very similar to Rwanda, and the green ones are less similar to those indicators. Basically, the idea that we had with this project is to make available the data. We are in the process of making the data available so that any country in Africa can download the indicators and perform their own analysis, and also look at the quality of indicators to understand which indicators to use. So we'll make that available in the coming month or so. But I mean, it's also, if you want to write to me, I can share the data set if you want for in the meantime. And yeah, I will leave you there. And thanks a lot.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you for the very nice presentation. There's a couple of questions for you in the chat that we also already invite you to respond to. And while you can do that, I want to give the floor to Jiawei to pick up on the story. And you can already share your screen, Jiawei, if you like. The floor is yours.
Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm going to talk about how China established its science and technology statistical monitoring system, how it works, and how we use the data based on this system. It took a long time for China to gradually establish this system in line with international standards. The story began in 1978 when we conducted the General Survey of Employees working in the fields of natural science and technology. We were trying to get a clear picture of human resources in natural science and technology. It was limited to some specific institutions and fields. 7 years later, in 1985, we conducted the General Survey on Science and Technology, marking the official launch of the science and technology statistical work. Annual report systems concerning research institutions, universities, and enterprises were established respectively by different administrative departments. Then in 1991, the National Annual Science and Technology Consolidated Report System was established. Aggregate indicators have been standardized and can be compared internationally. This is also the first time for China to release the total volume of R&D data. The year of 2000 is a milestone year when the first national R&D resources inventory was carried out to grasp the state of R&D investment. For the first time, the comprehensive R&D data and its distribution have been obtained. Also, with the first statistical regulations for science and technology inputs, the scope, classification standards, and calculation methods of indicators across different departments have been unified, and international comparability has been achieved. The second inventory was conducted in 2009. Entering the second decade of the 21st century, the National Innovation Survey System was established in 2012, and a new regulation for statistics of R&D inputs was released in 2019. So you see, our system starts from science and technology statistics, then R&D statistics, and finally was expanded to the innovation survey. So this is also a process of aligning with international standards to achieve comparability. So how does our system operate? It is set up based on the sectors of performance. The Ministry of Science and Technology, that is the most, and the Ministry of Education, MOE, and the National Bureau of Statistics, that is NBS, are responsible for the statistics of government research institutes, universities and colleges and enterprises respectively. The NBS is also in charge of the final data aggregation and release. During the process of data collection, a combination of the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach is implemented. The process begins with statistical design, you can see here, including questionnaires, online systems, procedures, standards, lists of qualified reporting units, and so on. Then at the end of the last year, the statistical tasks and the training are carried out from top to bottom, that is from the central government to provinces, then to cities, and finally to counties, trying to ensure the questionnaires are correctly understood. After this, the data is collected from bottom to top. Respondents of qualified reporting units should fill in the questionnaires online. These questionnaires help to keep consistency with historical ones and international standards, and also have to be discussed, amended, and improved to capture new issues in recent years. Two ways are used to control the data quality. The online system provides a plenty of verification relationships, pointing out the potential and possible mistakes and reminding the respondents to verify, as well as filling in some blanks automatically. Besides this, departments in charge at all levels need to check the accuracy of the data. The most MOE and the NBS, just as I mentioned before, take final responsibility to check the data respectively. After this, the data are provided to and aggregated by the NBS. After the assessment of data quality by more government departments, data of R&D expenditure is released in a communique around September, and more STI data are released in a yearbook, usually at the end of the year. So after all the surveys, we obtain a series of indicators and data which are centrally released in yearbooks represented by China's Statistical Yearbook on Science and Technology. This yearbook covers data series at the national, provincial, and local levels, showing the development of China's science and technology activities. Based on these indicators and data, we do our analysis and evaluations in a series of publications, one of which is China Science and Technology Indicators, also known as the Yellow Book on Science and Technology, published every 2 years. So in this book, we explore the changing trends and structures of R&D personnel and expenditure, show the development of papers and patents, analyze the science and technology activities of enterprises, universities, and research institutes, present the picture of high-tech industries, high-tech zones, and entrepreneurship, and reflects the landscape of STI across various regions and also the public attitudes towards science and technology. So to speak, it's a book presenting a comprehensive picture of China's science and technology and also innovation. And it can be used to evaluate China's STI capability. We also have other publications such as a National Innovation Index and so on. So this is a complete process about how we collect, generate, and use data for subsequent evaluations. So what are the implications? Firstly, Hugo, just as Hugo mentioned earlier, that monitoring is essential. It helps us to master the trend of the STI, find out advantages and shortcomings, and assess the effectiveness of policies. So it can provide us with insights for the next move. Secondly, the statistical system should be established step by step and needs interdepartmental coordination. It took decades for China to fully establish the system, and it is still being improved to capture changes. It started from certain fields with limited indicators. Then gradually, the survey scope expanded, the methods improved, and the number of indicators increased, and also the data quality enhanced. So besides, consistent with our administrative system, different ministries and departments get involved. Therefore, unified actions and standards are really needed. Thirdly, technical means become increasingly important. Our data collection relies on online systems to cover reporting units of all kinds. Verification relationships and automatic filling provide convenience for respondents to check their answers and to reduce their workload. It can also help departments and ministries that in charge to double-check aggregate data and control data quality. So, and now there are also some attempts to apply AI and machine learning in statistics. Finally, the analysis should consider national orientation as well as internationally comparison. I mentioned international comparability earlier, but what I didn't mention is that we also consider national orientation when we construct indicators and conduct evaluations. Indicators should be consistent with national development stage, strategies, future orientation, and demand to provide an effective guidance. We should take into account both the general pattern of STI and the particularity of a country. So that's my talk. Thank you for your attention, and back to you, Mindao.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that interesting talk about the Chinese experience. Again, I would like to invite everyone to put questions to Jiawei in the chat, and she will help answering them. And then let me create space in the screen to invite Abby, and I will also invite back Hugo, because now, in addition to the Chinese experience, we also want to share more African experience. Hugo, I'm going to give you the floor.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I will not say too much because I already had my share of speaking time. So welcome, Abby, for joining and for sharing your experience. And maybe my first question to you would be like, how would you approach this? What kind of, say, framework would you be using or are you using for monitoring STI in your own country?
Yes, thank you very much, Hugo, and thank you to all participants for being here, and to Mindel for great moderation, and to the speakers before now and the ones who will come afterwards. So to answer the question directly, I will be speaking first from my experience in Nigeria and also across a couple of other African countries. I'm sure that Lukovi will speak more about the Pan-African experience later. So what we do in Nigeria, based on my involvement with the official surveys that we've run over many years to monitor the STI system, both in terms of input, output, and broadly in terms of performance, is that we focus on two aspects of the measurement, and monitoring. So we run an official research and development survey, which it's in its third iteration now, and we run an official national innovation survey. So basically, we try to understand what goes on in terms of how much R&D is taking place within the economy, and also what is taking place on the output side in terms of how innovative the companies are. And I should say that in this regard, Nigeria and South Africa are indeed trailblazers. In fact, if my memory serves correctly, South Africa used to be the only country in Africa, maybe one of the very few, that started these and that had been doing it for a very long time, even before the Pan-African Initiative, that's the African Science, Technology, and Innovation Indicators program started. We started doing it in Nigeria between 2005 and 2007. And you know, the measurement in all the countries that I'm familiar with relies on some international frameworks. So the Oslo Manual for Innovation Measurement, the Frascati Manual for R&D Measurement, and the Canberra Manual, where we draw indicators for measuring human resources involved in science and technology. So the core philosophies are drawn from these international frameworks for many reasons. One, for international comparability, and but then they are still contextualized. So there are certain changes that happen within these instruments to make sure that they are fit for purpose within the country context. Thank you.
Okay, that was the question I was thinking about. Like yeah, you're referring to these, and I also refer to these international guidelines. To what extent you have to customize them to be able to say to implement them such in your own country that you take the most benefit out of it, because these manuals, of course, they were designed, you could say, historically, coming from countries in say in Europe, Northern America. So maybe not everything was designed in such a way as to best reflect what's going on in countries and other continents.
Yeah, that's totally correct, Hugo. And as I mentioned, you know, a lot of these instruments and the indicators are contextualized, but there is a trade-off which you implicitly alluded to during your presentation, Hugo, and that is the fact that we, as much as we want to collect domestically relevant contextualized indicators, we're also thinking about international comparability, because one of the purposes of monitoring the STI system is to benchmark, all right? Each country wants to know how well they are doing relative to international counterparts. So it then becomes a question of how much do we want to contextualize and still remain internationally comparable? So what has happened in my experience in Nigeria, and I'm familiar with the work that SESTI has done as well, is that there is a set of core indicators that are uniform across countries. And Mukovi might speak about this later. The NEPAD has done extensive work in this regard, helping countries to contextualize, but at the same time, standardize some of the indicators. So for example, we collect information on the share of firms that are innovative, R&D expenditure, you know, and those kind of things. But then there are some part of the contextualization is that, for instance, in Nigeria, we pay less attention to patents, which I would assume is a bit more important in the European context. So in fact, at a point, we didn't particularly go after firms telling us how many patents they have filed and so on and so forth. You know, so those kinds of contextualizations do occur. And I have to say that in recent years, we've started looking more at some of the less conventional sectors to collect innovation indicators. For example, in South Africa, there's been a series of agribusiness innovation surveys, so trying to track innovation within the agribusiness sector. And together with colleagues from SESTI, we've started running informal sector innovation surveys. So again, these are to reflect our contextual realities. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think very clear. I think I have one more question for you. I was also paying a bit attention to the time we still have. So in your view, what would be, the most critical factors to prioritize for developing a comprehensive monitoring and evaluation system on STI for African countries? And I think you already partially answered it, but maybe you want to give it...
Yes, a bit more specific around those. I mean, that's a very, very important question, but like you said, I would not say too much because I know that some of the subsequent presenters and the speakers will touch on that. But let me mention three important things here. The first one is that again, I'm speaking on the background of my experience in Nigeria and across African countries. The broad lack of institutionalized systems and governance frameworks for collecting data, not just collecting good quality data, but also ensuring that the data collection happens consistently. One of the things that Diego mentioned in his presentation is the lack of, time series data, longitudinal data. There are very, very few countries in Africa as of today where you can find time series data. And monitoring is a time series endeavor, as you would agree. So the fact that we don't have systems in place to ensure that we consistently collect high quality data over time, I think is a priority problem. And secondly is a generally low level of within country competence. Again, the NIATT has done a lot of work in helping countries to build capacity, but not every country is moving at the same rate. So contrary to the original intention of the STI, that's the African Science, Technology and Innovation Indicators Initiative, the idea was to help countries to become self-sufficient after a while, but I'm sure Lukovi will speak more about this subsequently. I don't think this is happening as well across countries. And then finally, there's need to be much more context-sensitive effort. So things similar to the informal sector innovation survey that I spoke about needs to happen across more countries so that one, we know what is going on contextually, and secondly, we can compare across countries. Thank you.
Okay. I'm quickly looking at Mindel. Mindel, do I have time for one more brief question? She's shaking her head. So
no, I'm gonna be very strict. It's like we want to stay within the time, and I want to give the floor to some of the people that have questions. So thank you for the interview.
Okay. Thank you.
The first person I would like to give the floor to is the hand that's raised in the chat by Romualdo Correa. Would you want to raise your question, please? And can you tell to whom you're asking this? Romualdo. I don't hear anything. I think you need to unmute. Okay, so as we're having trouble with the microphone, let me just go and directly ask the question of Caleb to you, Hugo. The question of Caleb is, do you have any experience? Maybe this is also a question to Abi. Do you have any experience in the use of qualitative data for STI monitoring?
See, that's the question I had wanted to ask. And I now put it in the chat box because I think we have up until now we have been talking about quantitative data, and that's I think for a monitoring system it usually well it's built on quantitative data, and I think it's useful. But in the end, if you really want to know, for example, why a policy worked or why a policy did not work, you have to go into more detail into that policy, and then you go into evaluations, and then you also need qualitative information. Well, my background is mostly on working with quantitative data and not with qualitative data, so I'm not really in a position to answer that one. But maybe one of my co-presenters,
Abi,
wants to step in.
Yes, I agree with Hugo, and well, I should say that Caleb is my colleague, so I can understand where that question is coming from. Like Hugo said, we've paid historically a lot of attention to quantitative indicators, but we're beginning to realize that qualitative indicators are very important and they are useful. I mean, I've done some work myself, not exactly in the context of STI monitoring and evaluation, but in other contexts related to policy monitoring and policy evaluation. So specifically, it's about youth entrepreneurship, where we have used qualitative data, and it works really, really well. I think the biggest part of the challenge is the data governance framework that doesn't seem to be in place as it should. And so as much as we are concerned about the quality of the quantitative indicators, we are also concerned about the quality and the consistency of the qualitative data that we would collect. And I think this is a very important problem that needs to be addressed first before we can move, particularly in Africa, because before we can move along the trajectory of using qualitative data for policy monitoring and evaluation.
Yeah, I would like to, if I can, I would like to give just 2 examples of qualitative data that can be used even in a quantitative way. So one is the World Economic Forum executive, how is it called? It's the Executive Opinion Survey, for instance. Some things that are very difficult to measure, such as how easy it is to open a business in a country, or how do you think, that the technological development in this sector is at this moment. Some of these things have been asked to, in this case, to business leaders, and some of these data are being used to, to characterize countries. So these are qualitative data. They may be biased, but still you have some idea. Now there's another example, which is a bit more systematic, and this happened in Colombia for a policy based focused on sustainable development. What we did at that moment was we didn't know what was the opinion of the people on their priorities, because we knew researchers were interested in specific things because they publish, but we didn't know the opinion of people, so they could have different priorities. In that case, we did a survey, because surveys are in a certain way qualitative. You can aggregate them, but it's qualitative data. And we did a survey of more than 400,000 people. Then we aggregated them and converted that into some sort of quantitative indicator. But this can also be used when the funds are available. You can use qualitative data.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me go to 2 more questions that we have from the audience, and I invite everyone else to put your questions in the chat. But the next person I would like to give the floor is Fabrice Tsugia. I'm sure I'm abusing your name. I'm sorry about that, but you have the floor.
Thank you, Mindel. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the panel. It was the great presentation. Then I have 2 questions, one for Hugo and the last one for the Chinese presentation. So the one for Hugo is that talking about the mode of innovation, we have seen that with the lack of indicators, it's a bit difficult to have an innovation adapted to the context of Africa. So I wanted to know, I think something should be done about the definition of science, looking at the indigenous population and the definition of techniques, because I think the population have their science and their techniques that is not going on the way of modern science. So don't you think that something has to be done in terms of innovation, looking the indigenous population cultures or habits or behaviors, something like that? So then I want to know how the Chinese have done to take in consideration this question of indigenous population, integration of science and techniques. So that's my question.
Okay. While we wait for Jiawei to join us, I think the first question is for you, Hugo.
Yeah, I can already start answering that. What I do know from the difficulty is, for example, that many of these standard indicators definitions, they're like historically developed, started up in the Western world, then also becoming implemented in other parts of the world. I know in Latin America, for example, for innovation, they have their own Bogota manual, where they also take into account that this innovation system is different or could be different than in European countries or Northern American countries. Also in Europe, we have people, say, in Southeastern Europe, say, complaining or pointing out that the innovation process in their countries is different from the northern and western part of Europe. So I do agree that, and also knowing, for example, that in Africa there is an informal sector, not everything is captured in official statistics, that the smaller firms are much more present and much more relevant than, for example, statistically what you observe in more developed countries. I do think that you have to customize, as also was already mentioned before, these international guidelines to the domestic setting or to the regional setting. For innovation, I know my office was involved a long time ago together with NEPAD for developing, I think, the first innovation surveys for Northern Africa. And there were also, I know from talking to my colleagues, there were quite some also cultural differences to how people, the interpretation of when is something new, when should something be perceived as an innovation. So this is something that you have to take into account, because even if you collect the data using the same, say, international guidelines, the interpretation can still be different. The way that, for example, I've been working together with the statistical office in Eurostat for most European countries on improving the questionnaire for the innovation survey for the last 14 years. And then we also noticed that in interactions with statistical offices in different countries, there were translation issues, there were interpretation issues. So even if you have guidelines, it can still lead to results which are not 100% comparable. It's something to take into account. I'm not sure if you can solve this, but if you're aware of some of these issues, of course, it will help you, and also in the interpretation of the results of your evaluation system. I think I will give over to answer the question on the Chinese STI system.
Thank you, Hugo. I think the statistics should be consistent with our development stage. So China begins with many very simple questionnaires and questions. At the beginning, we are not good at some innovations, and not good at some very technologies at very high level. So we start with some questions like, are these enterprises have new products or new techniques? And I'll raise an example such as science and technology personnel. Well, we didn't ask, do we have R&D personnel at first. We asked, do we have how many engineers we have, and how many assistant people we have, because at that time, science and technology people are not many in China. And then when our technology developed, we asked more questions about them and focus on R&D personnel. So it take a long time for us to develop our system to capture the big changes. We try to capture small changes at first, and finally the big changes. That also you can see a change in China's system, that we may ask how much do you spend on introducing technologies? How much do you spend on equipments with some technology? So, and now we ask, how much do you expend on your R&D at home? So it will take time. And also we have innovation survey that ask entrepreneurs to answer the questions such as what do they want from the policies, and what do they think of our policy and the obstacles. So innovation is everywhere. It covers a large scope of our society. So we may not start with we may not start with the conception of R&D, but we may start from a small changes. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very nice, very clear. I would like to end the Q&A with the question of Mr. Maruf Sani. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for allowing me to, to ask my question this way. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Egbetokun. It's nice seeing you again, and Dr. Lukovi-Seke. Anyway, so my first question will go to, Miss Han. I saw something when you were presenting where you have like 1 million plus firms that you collected data from, with regards to STI indicators. And I was wondering, what's the response rate like? How were you able to get that number? Because my experience in Nigeria is we find it very difficult, getting data, from firms in Nigeria. And has been giving us a lot of trouble. So I was wondering, how were you able to do that? And what's the response rate like when you compare to the total number of firms, in China? That's number one. Number two, I was also wondering if China has experience in collecting data from the informal sector. You understand that in many of the developing countries, what characterizes our economy is usually, a lot of firms within the informal sector. And you agree with me that it's also important for us to know what exactly is going on within that particular sector. So I was wondering if China has experience in collecting data from the informal sector. Because this will also help us, because in Nigeria, we are also working in collaboration with STI in South Africa, whereby we are trying to find, ways of collecting, data within this particular sector. So any experience you have for us will be very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could you repeat your first question?
First question was that during your presentation, I saw something like you collected data from 1 million firms from China.
Yeah.
Data. So I was wondering, how were you able to do that? Then what is the response rate like? Like when you compare to the total number of firms in China, what is the response rate like? What is the percentage of that 1 million out of, those the total number of firms in China?
Yes. Well, before that, I need to say that our companies in China has to get registered in the government. So we get the list of all the companies. And that's the basis of how we form our list of qualified companies that to answer our questionnaires. And based on this, then we will say their so we will for them, they will provide us with their scale of the employees and their productions, so that we will know which companies we need to collect data. So for some large companies, we will collect data from the for all the large companies, we have to collect their data, and they are they need to answer our questionnaires. It is compulsory, eligible. And for some small companies, we do not cover all the small companies. We will select some and to get form a sample, and then we will from the sample we will know the population and get our data. So we have two ways to get the company's data, and I think the second question, I just answered the second question at the beginning because they are registered in the government. So we get their list, and so they have to answer our questionnaires. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Okay, so sorry, one more. Do you
No,
mean
so I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Also registered? Okay.
Maruf,
Yeah,
I'm gonna close it here.
They also registered?
Yeah, maybe I can answer it in the chat.
Exactly.
Chat
Let's
box.
put
Thank you.
all the remaining
very much.
questions in the chat. And then with this, I would
Thank you
like
very much.
to thank the people from the monitoring panel, Abby, Hugo, Diego, and Jawe. Thank you for your presentation. And I would like to introduce Teresa, who is going to start the session on evaluation. So Teresa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you all see my presentation? So can you see it? Can you confirm?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. So hello everyone. I'm Teresa Farinha. I'm a research fellow at UN-IATT. And today I'll give a very short but practical overview of how impact evaluation can help strengthen STI policies, especially for Africa, so that we invest in what truly works. So when we fund research or support startups, we hope that they create innovation, jobs, growth. But did they actually cause those results? Not just did things improve, but did things improve because of the policy? So impact evaluation helps us find out whether a policy actually caused the intended changes, answering two vital questions. Answer two vital questions. So we want to know if it worked and whether it was worth the cost. Using a simple example, imagine that we fund 100 tech startups and 3 of them succeed. Is that good? Well, we can only know if it's good or not if we can tell how many would have succeeded without the funding. So the difference between what happened with the program and what would have happened without the program gives us the impact caused by the policy. This basic idea comes originally from clinical research and pharmacy, and we kept much of its terminology. So the basic idea is that there's a theory of change that explains how we expect to go from a program activity to the intended outcomes. Then there's the implementation of the program, and we record results of beneficiaries, which we call the treatment group. And then we want to compare these with the control group, which we call the counterfactual. And we call it the counterfactual because it didn't happen. We need to simulate it. So how do we do that? We build a control group that is as close as possible and plausible enough to the hypothetical group of treated firms in the scenario that they didn't receive the treatment, the policy. So it's an alternative reality that allows us to compare outcomes with and without the intervention so that we can isolate the impacts of the program. And the better we estimate that, the more accurately we can assess impact and the more useful for redesigning policy. So when we fund research or support startups, so there are core differences between monitoring and evaluation. Many of you already do monitoring. So how much money was spent, how many labs were funded, but monitoring only tells us if we are doing what we planned. Evaluation goes further. It tells us whether the intervention actually caused the intended impact and why it worked or didn't. But I want to emphasize this, that both are very much needed. Monitoring helps you stay on course, while evaluation helps you know if the journey was worth it and how to improve the next one. And together, they form a feedback loop that ensures that STI policies are evidence-based, efficient, and impactful. So what kind of questions do we ask in impact evaluation? For instance, did startup programs boost firm growth? Did R&D tax credits increase firm innovation? Or did tech training raise youth employment? These are what we call the first generation kind of questions. But nowadays, we often dive deeper to ask, do impacts depend on the type of beneficiaries, or on the treatment intensity, or timing, or sequencing with other programs? All these questions help us redesign policies to reach better outcomes. So every time I need to switch slides, I need to switch between screens. Now, STI impact evaluation are not easy. Unlike vaccines and cash transfers, STI policies are often aimed at facilitating innovation through a systematic approach, like promoting dynamic entrepreneurship. So it's not about delivering a single output. Impacts are taken, they can take years to appear, often beyond political cycles. And STI policies often generate spillovers, which is very good for innovation, but these impacts are very difficult to track. And another very important challenge is that we often have selection bias. So it's easier to build a good counterfactual in the scenario that we have a randomized selection of treated firms. But often, and especially in STI policies, this is not the case. So STI policies often target stronger firms or more promising firms. And if those firms do well, was it a policy, or were they already on a better path? This means that we can't just compare treated and untreated firms directly. The groups are too different, they are not comparable. So in order to isolate the impact, we need a rigorous method, and often a combination of methods, like DND, matching methods, regression discontinuity, instrumental variables, and so on. I'm sure you're familiar with many of these terms. For example, to give an example, in Portugal, we used linked employer-employee data to estimate the impacts of support to innovation on job quality. And we had to combine several methods together to control for selection bias and estimate the true impact, which was positive and economically significant. But as in many African countries, if there's absence of reliable and timely data, it's very difficult to track the long-term effects of STI policies. And this matters because without good data, we can't build counterfactual. And without a counterfactual, we can't evaluate whether a policy truly caused the observed outcomes. And at the end, well, this limits the government's ability to learn, adjust, and scale effective STI interventions. But despite all these challenges, impact evaluation is essential. African countries have limited public resources, so every investment must be justified. And we can't afford to rely on assumptions or guesswork because STI programs are high stakes and long-term. So are these investments leading to better jobs, stronger economies, sustainable and inclusive growth? We need to learn what works and what doesn't. So impact evaluation provides policymakers with accountability, but more importantly, with evidence-based decisions and better policies through learning. So let's invest in evidence, not just effort. And if you didn't yet, consider starting small with pilot evaluations, focus on outcomes, asking the right questions, support data systems. This is very important because you want to build monitoring and evaluation into your policy design from the start. And conduct impact evaluation and use those findings to learn, adapt, and scale what works and fix what doesn't work.
Thank you.
So to finish, yeah, thank you very much.
Sorry, Teresa, I didn't want to interrupt you, but thank you for the presentation. Again, an invitation to the audience to please put your questions to Teresa in the chat. But after the next two talks, there will also be time to do a Q&A with Teresa as well. We now continue with Diego again to follow up on the need for funding. Diego, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Let me try to share my screen. Yeah, so there is a need to evaluate and to isolate the impacts of policies on the outcomes. But also because we want to do that, it's better to do it earlier than later. And our message here with this presentation, also based on a project with Tommaso Charlie, is that we need to design evaluation and impact from the beginning. So that's the idea of this presentation. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so the process of designing and evaluating research funding seems straightforward, but there are often hidden complexities. For example, what is the link between research inputs, outcomes, and instead intended impacts? What specific impacts should the funding programs aim for? Is it scientific, societal, or both? Who gets to choose the objectives of the funding program? What time horizons should the funding programs cover? Well, our work intended to uncover this often tacit knowledge that is available in the academic and grey literature, emphasizing on the steps for funding and evaluating research. Let's start by looking at the key considerations for the design of research funding programs, whether the focus is on scientific impact or societal impact. So the idea of scientific and innovative impact is that it should advance the career of researchers, or it should build long-term research capacity, foster international collaboration, etc. But if you compare it to societal impact, the main idea of societal impact is that we should build the evidence base for policy formulation, or we should improve the environment, improving the well-being of citizens, or supporting their other policy objectives of countries, which makes these two types of impact very different and at least should be given full consideration during the design phase of funding programs and evaluation. So from the literature, we got some synthesis of the steps of research funding, and these are basically those stages that we have found in the literature. As you can see, there are some differences between funding for scientific impact versus funding for societal impact. So for instance, at the macro level, in scientific impact, funders need to choose the overall domain and stage of research they want to support. For example, basic versus applied research. In societal impact, they also need to include the societal issues to be addressed and the societal transformations expected. In the proposal stage, there are differences too. For programs focused on societal impact, there is often more interaction between funders and applicants, with feedback and training provided. The proposal evaluation also considers different types of users and potential societal impacts rather than just academic peer review. Also in the post-hour management, with programs targeting societal impact requiring more support, more monitoring, networking, and translational activities. So basically, these are the stages that we identified, and these are some of the characteristics involved in such stages, just to make the difference between them. We also were very interested in understanding the key variables in research funding, because this is talked between the people who work in the organizations, but it's not often made explicit. So what is the time horizon? Are we going to fund for short term, mid term, long term? What is the target? Are we targeting individuals, such as researchers or organizations, teams, projects? What is the degree of uncertainty that this program is going to undertake? Is it a radical or incremental innovation? And so what are the risks linked to each of these options? What types of collaborations are we going to propel? Is it within and across disciplines and knowledge procedures? Is it mono, inter, transdisciplinary? Who are the beneficiaries? This is especially important for societal impact. If they are non-academics, who is exactly the beneficiaries of our program? So selection of variables should be coherent with the macro objectives, with specific priorities, and with conceptual models. For example, it is common to find expectations of long-term societal impact from short-term projects aimed at scientific excellence. So sometimes research organizations fund 1 year, 2 year programs, very targeted towards productivity, scientific productivity, and they evaluate that research as if it were a societal impact project. So this mismatch should be taken into consideration before doing this kind of evaluations. One specific process in the research funding is the peer review process, and we try to understand how it is performed and to identify different stages. So we identified these stages in the peer review process of proposals, including the eligibility screening, reviewer selection, then doing the peer review, then doing panel reviews, and getting to a final decision. Importantly, in the peer review literature, we found that feedback is very important. Feedback is very important because it allows people who are applying to learn, and it actually plays a very important role in the capacity development of a country, at least to present, to submit proposals. But there are many challenges. So ranking research proposals that are of similarly good quality is very difficult. There's no evidence on the efficacy of peer reviewing on predicting societal impact, for instance, because many peer reviewers focus on the academic importance of research, and there are also, of course, unconscious biases. But we have found that the literature still makes some suggestions. So, for instance, avoiding the option for researchers to suggest peer reviewers, because that could bias the review, double-blind review of proposals, and even kinds of new developments such as lotteries to select between proposals with similar high quality. So you have two proposals with similar high quality. How can you choose? Well, you can perform a lottery. In some countries that is allowed. In some other countries that would be looked up as really, really bad practice. But there is need for experimentation, because this is a very important point of the funding process. And then in the post-hour management activities, which are also crucial, they require support, monitoring, networking, and translational activities, especially for programs targeting societal impact. So if you can see here, there are many more activities involved in supporting societal impact projects rather than scientific impact projects. But this has to be acknowledged at the organizational level. Otherwise, there will be confusion. And especially when organizations try to fund societal impact, they should take into account this kind of support that is usually absent. So I have seen some interdisciplinary teams that are not allowed allocations for activities to interact with the other partners so that they develop a common language. You know that interacting between disciplines takes time. They have different languages, different understandings. So this kind of support is very important if an organization wants to aim for societal impact. So here are then we go from design to the evaluation. So that when you are trying to perform an evaluation, the main steps in designing such an evaluation include aligning with the research funding program design, because the evaluation should respond to the objectives of the research funding design, assessing the key impacts expected, defining the evaluation aims based on the design, ensuring adequate data is available, building appropriate indicators, and then only then analyzing the impacts of the funded research. Here, we just wanted to present a simple tool that could be used by by interested users, trying to link funding design to evaluation design. So the idea is pay attention to the context of research. In the funding design, for instance, a stable region with capacity to do world-leading research, right? If you are in such a region, then how should be the evaluation design? Assess the extent to which the funded research produces scientific outputs used by other scientists contributed to scientific leadership, right? Because you have already a capacity to do world-leading research, but also focus on the conceptual model that you are using. Someone was asking about the conceptual models. Are you using a logical framework model or a portfolio approach? So depending on that, for instance, assess if funding has an impact on producing high quality research and supporting researchers' careers. Inputs are transformed into outputs. So this kind of matrix should allow someone to put there the assumptions of funding versus the evaluation. And these two things should match in order to make a link between the funding and the evaluation, so that the evaluation actually responds to the funding design. Basically, that is my presentation, and I hope what we hope is that this kind of instrument is helpful. It's a very basic tool for people who are involved in research funding at the beginning, so that they can match the funding design and the evaluation at the beginning of the program and not at the end. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jigo, for that talk. While we are setting up for the next interview and allow also Zhengmei to share the screen, we would like to actually do a Mentimeter question now to ask the audience who you think is responsible for M&E in your context, in the African context. Who is the main party that we should hold accountable or make responsible for M&E? And you've seen that we've added the Q&R code of the Mentimeter. Let's see what the responses are. Okay, I think can we move to the next question, please? Because this is the previous one. There you go. Who is responsible for the STI policy evaluation, in your view? And you see, I've added also the spotlight now to Mr. Nazim Mustafa, who is working at CESTI, the Center of Science, Technology and Innovation Indicators in South Africa. So you might want to actually have a careful look, because this question is going to add to you probably as the first one. What do you think should be responsible for monitoring and evaluation, and what's the difficulty with that? We see that 56% is still considering of the audience is still considering the ministerial responsibility, ministries of STI, science and education. This is interesting. And there's 24, the Ministry of Planning. So about 75% is at national level. Thanks for sharing this, Zhengmei. And maybe this is, Nazim, this is for you then, the invitation to take the floor. What do you think of this outcome?
So good morning, everybody. I know that in South Africa, in the early 2000s, it was decided by the National Statistical Organization and the Department of Science and Technology that it would be the Department of Science and Technology that would be responsible for the monitoring of STI policies and also for evaluation of those policies and developing them as well. So I think there was a lot of consideration given to the various bodies of state by the National Statistical Organization, and it collects data for most of the needed indicators on the economy and also on society. But there are certain departments that are allocated the mandate for their particular specialist area. like, for example, the science and technology department, as well as the police and others like education, who have their own collection bodies for their statistics. So it's not surprising to me that it should be the majority view that the ministries of science technology are responsible for that.
Thanks a lot, Nasim. I would like to start by you explaining a little bit about the primary focus of STI and whether it is related to impact evaluation or whether it is more focused on policy work, and yeah, just a description for the audience.
So STI was started early 2000, so 2001 if I'm not mistaken, and our main role is to collect data on science, technology, and innovation. Specifically, we started off doing R&D survey, and we are the country on the continent that has the longest history of collecting R&D survey data since it got started in the 60s. And then we also moved on to develop surveys on business innovation. And for a long time, those are the surveys that we've been collecting. And it's important for us to have a consistent methodology for collecting those surveys, because we want to be able to do comparisons in time, especially in the R&D survey, where it's very important to maintain the time series to allow us to do evaluations. And the evaluations that are done in that sense are pretty much econometric evaluations. So if you've got a very stable time series, you can do econometric studies and see what the impact is on GDP. And these things are the typical kinds of things that you can do when it comes to evaluation, because it is very difficult to find direct impact of any particular policy, even in R&D policy, on, let's say, GDP. Similar things can be done with the innovation survey data. We also maintain a methodology that is consistent across different countries by following the OECD NESTI group, which manages the methodologies in these different surveys. So that allows us to do cross-country comparisons as well. And in that way, you can assess the impact of your policies relative to what's happened in other countries that have similar policies. And once again, you could do econometric studies to look at particular unit level data and compare firms that have access or have used certain policy instruments to see if they have performed better in some respects to others that have not. So those are the main kinds of things that you can do with those kinds of surveys, which are typical, I think, also in many OECD countries or more developed countries. You will have the same surveys. It's like a CIS survey, the Business Innovation Survey. But then we also have at SESTI surveys that are specific to the context of Africa. And in particular, it might be looking at specific sectors like the agricultural sector. So we've got a special agricultural business innovation survey that we have developed to look at the agricultural sector as a special sector of interest in our context, in the continental context. And then also what we have developed is a survey on innovation in the informal sector that is suitable for standardization. Now, standardization is important, as I've already explained. So we think that this is actually quite an important thing. It allows us, and I think maybe if I can just spend like a minute maybe explaining how it works, then I can maybe go on to say what I think would be an interesting way of doing evaluations, which we've maybe stumbled across. But the innovation in the informal sector survey is very much an exploratory survey that we have developed to look at the informal sector, which is a large sector on the continent. And in South Africa, it's not as large as in other countries, but we've developed an instrument that we think can be used as a standard for these contexts. And we've used a specific methodology which makes it a local, very small area application. So that means that it's still very much, as I say, in the developing stage, and we are trying to expand its usage to other countries on the continent, and many have shown interest. And Nigeria is the one country that has actually replicated that the instrument and certainly some aspects of the methodology. But what it does allow you to do is it allows you to measure if you are an informal business owner, then you are able to, sorry, let me first say, okay, so what we do is we measure the local innovation system. And then, in terms of the strength of interactions, in terms of the knowledge network, and then also it is linked also to the production aspects of that local innovation system. So if you are a business owner in that system, what we have developed also is an app which allows you as an informal business owner to assess your innovation capabilities, and then potentially also to try and improve your innovation capabilities by looking at information that the app will provide you on what you are as a business compared to what an ideal might be. So in principle, this would ultimately allow us to do evaluations of certainly that framework that we have developed on local businesses that do innovation in the informal sector.
Yeah, on that topic of informal innovation, have you found some resistance from businesses to participate, or some challenges? Because of course, I mean, they are informal by definition. So the way to approach them and to include them into this program may be challenging. So I wonder what kind of challenges you have found and how you have overcome them.
Yes, I think the biggest challenge is actually getting that sense of trust of working with these businesses, because they tend to, first of all, they tend to be in very impoverished areas. And you do also need to be able, in some cases, to get access through one of the studies, the first study that we did was in an area which was a rural area, semi-rural area, where there was where the local chief also is important in engaging with the community. So what you have to do is to be sensitive to gatekeepers, and also very different types of gatekeepers depending upon the context, because that's very important to be able to get access to surveying. And then what we also try to do is to work in a fashion which is co-developing certainly the data collection we have done in a fashion where we include the local business owners in the development of that. So the methodology we employed was both a quantitative methodology for the survey itself, but then also we had some qualitative methodologies such as digital stories and interviews of the local innovation system network people. So
excellent.
Those are the things actually which you have to be aware of and try and prepare for. It's very important getting the access.
Yeah, exactly. How do you identify those gatekeepers? I mean, because before you go to them, you have to identify them, to map where they are. How can you do that? And when you do that, how do you start the process ongoing?
Yeah, so it's very important to know what the stakeholders are. When you do the innovation system mapping, then you do need to know what the stakeholders are to get the important actors in the system. I can tell you with the first survey that we did, which was in the rural area I described earlier, we were fortunate in that the HSRC, to which we are part of the HSRC. The HSRC had a unit that was located permanently in that area, and they often do surveys or studies with the local community. So they already had established those particular links with the local chief, especially, which is very important in that particular area, and then also with the community. And then also, as part of the way we do the survey, we involve the community in actually collecting the data. So we get people from the area to do the collection and work with us in that way.
What are the incentives for the community to gather the data? And please explain to us a little bit about your first findings. What have you found in terms of the innovation in these communities?
Sure. So there is no real incentive what we do is, because these are businesses, if we interview them more for a questionnaire or for any reason, then we compensate them for the time that they've lost. So that's, I mean, it's not the incentive in any way, but it's just a compensation so that they don't lose money. Of course, these are very low economically active areas. So the results we found were very interesting. The innovation rates are really very high, actually, in local informal business settings. The types of innovation, though, are not typically the technological types of innovation that you would get from, say, a formal business innovation survey, but are mostly non-technological. And then the adaptation of the innovation, the concept of innovation to the local setting, we found to be, the most important thing, really. In fact, it may actually be I think we spent quite a lot of time actually adapting various questionnaires from people that had done studies before on the informal sector, as well as questionnaires by people like the World Bank had done some work there as well. And we did some piloting and some interviews so that we could make that suitable for the context that we were working within. And from that, we managed to get to something which we consider to be a measurement instrument. We do have concepts which transfer to other areas, which is what we require. And yes, and so it's I think it's the first standard, really, the standardized tool for measuring innovation in the informal sector, which is adapted to the informal sector specifically.
Yeah. How do you think that these results that you're getting are impacting the national policies in terms of the changes that they have performed?
Well, so this is the thing, really. So like I say, we were established, STI was established by the government to do R&D surveys and formal business innovation surveys. But as part of our research, we also went out of our way to actually develop these other instruments like the Agricultural Business Innovation Survey and the Informal Sector Innovation Survey, because we thought these were important. The point being that if there are no tools, if there are no measurement tools for the informal sector, then they don't appear on the agenda of the policymaker. And so what we have done is we've managed to, we work closely with the policymakers within the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. And so when it comes to the policymaker, there are really, in this country, in South Africa, and I think probably on many countries on the continent, when it comes to innovation, there are typically two very distinct policy goals, I'd imagine. In South Africa, we have a very large formal sector, which is quite advanced and high-tech in some places. And the policy goal, I'm speaking very loosely here, might typically be to improve competitiveness, export ability of high-tech products. Whereas for the informal sector, which is a very impoverished area and so on, the goal would be to improve livelihoods within that area. So it's very different policy goals. And the data tends to be, historically, there has been less focus on informal sector in South Africa. So the idea is to get more data on those issues to bring them to the policymakers. And we have had a lot of appetite from various policymakers, both at the national level and also the provincial level and local level also, but mostly at the national level and provincial level on informal sector innovation. So the work that we do with our partners on the regional level typically would be working with them on the formal businesses, the R&D, the business innovation sector, but the real interest we find often from those people is on the informal sector, where there's a lot of thought and a lot of interest.
What are the key points that you think other countries should take into account if they wanted to do something along those lines, going to measure the informal economy? It could be, in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of capacity or political will, etc.
Yes. So it's for us, like I said, it was really our initiative that got us to do the business, informal sector innovation studies and also the surveys, and to do it in such a way that it's a measurement tool. So that's quite important, is to have standardized methodologies. Now, there are no standardized methodologies as yet. Well, we are working on developing those standardized methodologies and writing it up in guidelines, manuals, and also toolkits that we have developed for other countries to be doing those surveys, including, the other surveys that we do as well. So that's the important thing, I think, is to have a standard methodology. And there's no such thing on the continent as yet. So we have to develop it ourselves, because it's not going to be found anywhere else. I mean, it's our context, and we're the ones that are able to understand it and produce that. And then for you to be able to do an informal sector innovation survey, again, you are quite right. You do need to have that government support at a very high level for that, because I think historically, we've on the continent, we have had to, the measurement products that we have installed are the R&D surveys and the business innovation surveys in a very sparse number of countries. And I mean, that is important because there are these sectors that need to be covered on the continent. However, the informal sector is 90%, 80% of the continent, and it actually needs a lot more support from the policymakers and governments. And for that, it needs independent funding mainly.
Thanks a lot, Nasim. Over to Mindel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very insightful, Nasim. I want to actually spend a little bit of time again for Q&A. And we had one hand raised from Makabe. Makabe, if you still have your question, please feel free to join the Q&A session. But before we go to that question, Teresa, there's a question in the chat for you that reads, do we need a log frame or a theory of change to do a good evaluation? Can you respond to that, please? And you need to unmute.
Thank you, Mindel. Thank you, everyone. Yes, absolutely. We need a theory of change so that we can understand where the impacts can come from. There's direct impacts from the policy, there's indirect impacts, there's spillovers, externalities. All of this needs to be well understood. We need to make a good story of what's happening. We need to be able to estimate as best as we can with quantitative and qualitative data. We need to build a story of what's happening because of the policy, but also because of other factors that might also be influencing the impacts, so that we can isolate very well what comes from the policy and what comes from other sources to understand what works for who, when, in coordination with what other policies, so that we can have the most efficient possible STI policies.
Thank you. Jigo, there was also a question for you in the chat, which is, how do you define what the macro priorities are? Maybe that's an interesting one for Nasim as well. So maybe you both can reflect on that.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk only from my experience, because I think this is done in very different ways, depending on the countries, depending on the organizations. So I can talk a little bit about how it's done in Colombia, in which I have experience as a civil servant. So basically the priorities there have been two ways to define them. One is very top-down, so it comes from the National Development Plan, and then all the priorities are set already, and there is some room for flexibility for specific ministries, specifically the Science and Technology and Innovation Ministry, to steer that up. For instance, by a committee, like a high-level committee, who decide what the priorities should be for the next 4 years. Now, the problem with that, because there is also the bottom-up approach, but the problem with that is that after 4 years, a new government comes and sets a new set of priorities. So there's no continuity. There's no like a state policy, because I think in certain way, because it has been set up from the top down. So it's not, researchers interacting with communities, etc., and developing a common plan that these policies change every 4 years. The other one is more bottom-up, is when researchers come together and establish their own research program. And it's happened in some occasions, but it's not like the standard. So for instance, there is a biodiversity conservation program in Colombia that has been very successful across the decades. But this is because there is a strong community interested in that, made by researchers and also citizens who are actually included in the compilation of data. And this has transcended different governments. So two ways to set up those priorities, at least in my experience.
Thank you. Nazim, there's a question for you specifically in the chat as well, which is, what would be examples of innovations or innovation indicators in the informal sector? Can you highlight some?
So I think maybe for me, certainly the most important development that we've done with respect to the informal sector innovation indicators, new indicators, is that we have developed a methodology and then, well, a conceptual framework really, and then also the methodology in the survey collection so that we are able to collect on the system strength. Now, I think that is actually a very useful thing in this context, because the innovations that take place in the informal sector are not technological, radical, changing, you know, all of those types of indicators that would measure that type of innovation is not really relevant. What is relevant in the informal sector is to be able to grow, so to learn. So it's about the learning indicators, and for that we've collected data quite a bit on the different modes of learning as part of the questionnaire, and certainly how your network, your local innovation network, can grow. And then also the work that we have done relates to this question of formalization. In the informal sector, there is a typical policy goal to get informal businesses formalized. And what we have done is we have looked at the real situation in the informal sector with regards to how innovation is related to the growth in formality, where formality we see not as a simple one-dimensional point, but there is this multitude of informality states that we have found. And the dynamics of the situation is such that innovation is really important for how a particular business can grow in structure or grow towards what would be, well, not just formal businesses, but sustainable formality is what we like to think of, where you don't just have registration of the firm, but also other elements like, for example, employment of people, management, the introduction of financial accounting, equipment, and so on. So those are the indicators I think that are really interesting and new. The idea of linking innovation to the growth in formality, and then also to be able to measure the innovation system itself directly, quantitatively.
Thank you. Thank you. I have one last question. I think it's for Teresa. It's from the chat too, which is summarized: where does monitoring end and where does evaluation start? How do we decide if we're supposed to do a monitoring job, and what is monitoring still useful for, and where do we really need to step into evaluation to get clarity? I know that this is a big one, but yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I replied also in the chat, even with a bigger extension. I think they are both needed. They ask different questions and they are very much complementary, right? So we do want to know if we are implementing things right, because we have a series of how things happen, of how we are supposed to reach the outcomes. And we need to ensure that we are on track and doing what's supposed to be done. At the same time, we want to understand if things are going well because of what we are doing or because of something else, so that we are not just wasting very, very precious resources. And they are very much complementary since the beginning, because to do evaluation, we need to have we need to ask the right questions, and to answer them, we need to have the precise variables that we are going to need to conduct the study, right? And if they were not gathered from the beginning in the monitoring exercise, we cannot do anything with it. So monitoring alone doesn't give us much. Evaluation alone cannot do evaluation because we need the collection of data. So they really need to be integrated in the policy design from the beginning. So there's the implementation of the policy, there's the monitoring, and there's the evaluation. They go together. They answer different questions. If you want to put it in a time frame, it's different nature of question. But if you want to put in time frame, yeah, monitoring is an ongoing process, and evaluation is midterm and at the end. But there needs to have been thought through since the beginning with monitoring and with the design of the policy.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very clear. I think it feeds into the next Mentimeter question. So let's move on to the next session. Thank you very much, Nazim and Diego and Teresa, for your insightful talks. And while I invite the audience to respond to this new question in the Mentimeter, I also invite Chucks to join us as he will take over the next section. Nazim, Diego, Teresa, there might be more questions in the chat, so feel free to respond there as well. Thank you. Okay, so everyone, you're invited to respond to the Mentimeter. And then, Chucks, this is interesting, I guess, for you. This is the bridge to the next session. We're going to start now with the third and last section of today, which is about the needs and the challenges specifically for the African context. Now, obviously, we touched upon a couple of those already, but now on the screen, we'll see a couple of new ones. We need capacity building. We need trained people, capacity building. We need funding. Chucks, I'm going to give you the floor to look at the screen, and then you can also start your talk.
Looking at the screen, thanks, Minde. But more importantly, thanks to colleagues who have already covered a big part of what we'll be building on. After me, our colleague from UN-IATT will also respond to some of these points that has been raised around skills, capacity, what the African Union has been doing. Some have been mentioned already by Abiodun during his talk, how the UN-IATT is supporting the continent across. But also to Nazim as well. Thanks a lot to Nazim. Nazim STI has been doing a lot of this kind of work as well, supporting the continent across with STI policy making, with specifically on evaluation and monitoring and surveys. So, Seko, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. I don't know if you can hear me. Apology for combining several devices and gadgets. Okay. Once again, greeting to our participant, distinguished participant. I'm not in the office attending the G20 meeting. I have some questions sent to me by Dr. Chucks with regard to the experience so far on the continent. The first question on the opportunity as well as challenge. Oh, yes.
Okay, yeah. I'll do my presentation and then you respond later to the questions, yeah?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
So welcome, colleagues. I'll just share my slide and then we can try to get that going. So let's put it on presentation mode. Slideshow. So I'll be building on continue to share. Is it sharing, colleagues? Okay, thank you, Diego. So we'll be building on what colleagues have been mentioning and what has been covered already so far. Just a few slides to present a bit of the theory behind what we're doing. And then we also bring in the practical side, which, as you heard already, Seke will do that. So I'll bring the work we've been doing at the Transformative Innovation Policy Consortium based at the University of Sussex, but we also have the branch, the Africa branch, which is the Transformative Innovation Africa Hub, is based at the University of Pretoria, where I also have a position there. So I share my time between University of Sussex and the University of Pretoria. So colleagues, so you'll be hearing some of the materials from that. And what have we been doing? The work the TIPSI consortium have been doing, for those who know, impact has been mentioned a lot. We've had Teresa present around impact evaluation. So thank you again, as I said. But there are 4 core areas of work. One is the research and co-production of knowledge, which involves transdisciplinary research a lot. I won't go into details on any of this, as you know, our time is short, so we'll just run through them. But the other has been as well on policy experimentation with demonstration. You will see why, again, that is important. And then capacity building and skills, again, on how we do why we do, and then a link to evaluation and deep learning. So evaluation is the focus of today, but you'll see why we're also doing that. But again, to emphasize that the colleagues who have shared a lot on impact evaluation, why evaluation is important, is very critical here. Bearing in mind that we're within the SDGs era, this becomes quite, takes a much more different tone as well, because we're doing STI policy now for the SDGs, putting it in SDG. The theory of innovation has evolved a bit, as many of us know. We've been mostly around the R&D and the regulation frame, which happened quite a lot after the World Wars. First and Second World War. Science became the dominant approach, promoting research and science, but that shifted a little bit towards the national system of innovation framework. So what we've been hearing today, a lot of what we've been hearing, and indicators, but also the measurement and the approaches have been focusing on these 2 frames, which is the improving R&D, for example, improving research and development, improving gross domestic expenditure on R&D, but also funding, and also R&D at higher education and different levels of R&D, and indicators to measure that, but also science. So many of the indicators we're using are still on this frame 1 kind of thinking, where we're measuring a lot of science. We've heard a lot of publications, citations, those have been the indicators. But then a new set of indicators have also been included quite strongly to measure innovation ecosystem. Nazim was referring to some of them. And then fast forward a little bit to now, we see the SDG era. What has been the discussion has been really hard around systems change. So how do we continue to have economic growth? And but things like social challenges are also increasing. So inequality is increasing across the world, but also across individuals. So how do we redirect the system? So how do we transform the system? So the questions have been, how do we redirect science, technology, and innovation towards economic growth, for sure, for still emphasizing economic growth, but also addressing social and environmental concerns. So what we see here is indicators are still a bit behind in this area to try to look at transformative change, which is really systems change, addressing the 3 dimensions of competitiveness and economic growth on one, which is what frame 1 and frame 2 try to do, but also now bringing in very strongly social and environmental dimensions into the discussion. So the indicators, again, are not catching up on this. So what are we trying to do in this area in our own work? We've been doing an evaluation in slightly differently.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you please confirm you're still speaking on the slide of the frameworks?
Sorry?
Can you please confirm if you are still speaking on the slide of the frameworks, or?
Yeah, I'm still speaking on the slide. It's just one slide I have. Yeah, so I'm still using this slide.
Please go ahead.
This is the main slide. The next slide is just an example. So yeah, so again, just focusing on what we measure, saying what we measure has been on frame 1, which is this one. The many of the indicators we've been using are still based on frame 1. The what we've been hearing, funding of science, funding of technology, citation, publication. There's been progress towards measuring on frame 2. We're measuring, but even this is still a bit weak because we're not measuring yet innovation and digital ecosystem, which, for example, is very strong in the African continent. So an example of that, now this is the first change I'm making on the slide. So I bring this one to show which is what we've heard quite a lot. You can see even at this level of measuring R&D survey and innovation survey, you can see that about half of the continent still don't have data at all. If you count the ones that have not done any of this measurement, my colleague Seke will speak more about this, why this is the case and what they've been doing to correct it. So this is where we are. So the question now becomes, if we're still focusing on frame 1 and frame 2 kind of measurement, even that is still proving to be a challenge. So there will be some questions to ask in the African continent, how we navigate the tensions between continue to do this and that. But why I wanted to focus on frame 3 a lot is because of some of the points that have been made. The informal economy has been mentioned many times. In frame 3, we measure as well a lot of innovation on grassroots. We measure a lot of learning. We use formative evaluation much more stronger than summative evaluation, which you measure at the end and doesn't encourage enough learning and adaptation. So the frame 3 approach, what we've been doing is really thinking of different tools, alternative tools. We use the language of transformative outcomes. What are the kind of impact and outcomes you measure, and how do they transform the system? So if we're having economic growth still continue to happen, but social and environmental challenges also continue to happen at the same pace or even worse, the question becomes, how do we change the system so that this tension doesn't continue to be the situation we are. So back to this slide again, which is the most recent we could find. There is a Outlook 4 have just been released, but Outlook 3 is enough for us to get the picture of what we're trying to explain here. You can see that many of the countries are still struggling. Again, we'll come into those questions later. Whether it's data skills, some of the challenges we mentioned there, data, funding, capacity issues, many of these issues are here, but we're not focusing on the challenge anymore. Now we're trying to look at the people who are trying to address these challenges, what have they been doing and how successful have they been. So to bring this discussion a bit more closer, this is what the frame 3 is looking at. Rather than look at research and development simply as we're doing, and then measuring R&D and measuring innovation, which obviously focuses more on economic growth and competitiveness. Because of the indicators we use, this is not wrong, it's just indicators are still limited to this frame. What we're doing now is how do we incorporate stronger dimensions of environmental and social challenges in the indicators, but also sustainability challenges, considering that we're in the SDG, this is very important, and then at the same time, economic growth happening. I won't go into the details of the theoretical framework, some of you will know it, but this is based on a very strong theoretical framework that informs this work. So what is at stake, as I've been repeating, is really changing the socio-technical system. So we're measuring around these dimensions of the system. So how do you change this system so that we can actually get the kind of long-term change and impact we're measuring? So focusing on, again, frame 1 and frame 2 indicators are great. We're not saying they're bad. We're saying they all work together, but now there is need for more indicators to be included, which will help us understand, for example, what we heard just now, that for the informal economy, which is 80–90%, learning is very important for them. But then many of the indicators we have don't capture learning properly. How do we ensure that the system is learning and the system is transforming and changing towards learning, much more importantly, so to capture that, but also to measure institutionalization of new learning. If you have learned something new, how are they being institutionalized? So we use the formative approach very strongly because the actors who are implementing the policies are also evaluating at the same time and capturing the data, as opposed to waiting to the end of the project and then people begin to evaluate and try to capture data. That is useful, but then it means the learning is not adaptive or robust as we would like it to be, because you don't have much of the space to make the corrections and the changes that you need for the project to succeed in that case. So I'm going to leave 1 or 2 of my minutes for my colleague to be able to answer some questions. Seke, if you can, I couldn't see you because I'm sharing, but I can unshare if that helps so that I can see you. So we're going to now try to ask some questions. Seke is online. Ask some questions. This is the first question, Seke. So UN-IATT has been working in Africa to help develop indicators and improve R&D and innovation survey measurement. What has been the challenges, opportunity, and for opportunities for improvement and lessons so far So if
thank you very
Mindel
much.
is around and can help us see
Can you-
that.
It is confirmed. We see Seke now.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
we can hear you, Seke, but I can't see you. Yeah, so let me try. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead. Okay,
I'm
excellent.
using 2 sessions. I'm using 2 sessions because of some challenges at the G20 facility in Mpumalanga. Apology for that.
It's okay.
I'll be a bit quicker, but if you don't get me properly, just alert me that my signal is bad.
We can hear you.
In terms of yes, in terms of the opportunity, let me check once again what I can see here. Yes, indicators and measurement evaluation. SDGs has been working in Africa to help develop indicators and improve R&D. So what has been the challenges, opportunity for improvement and lessons so far? Number one, I just need to let you know that if I have to flag the opportunity at the same time, I will develop those opportunity to show challenges that some countries went through in not leveraging the opportunity. Number one, when the initiative came into being in 2007, the intention was to institutionalize the process. So very few countries did manage to do so. When I say few, compared to the 55 African Union member states. So for us, it's an opportunity because we have a directorate in charge of the measurement. We have in some countries, even councils handling the measurement, even commissions. So for us, it's a plus. So those are a really good opportunity. We are seeing a level of total buy-in. But in contrary, when this opportunity can be interpreted as a challenge, a country where there is no a single directorate in charge of STI measurement, among other assignments, is a very painful situation where we end up to a one-man show. When that person is not there, everything is grounded at the country level. And also we are observing the involvement of National Statistics Office, seen as an opportunity, but at the same time, that could be a challenge in a country where at least the person in charge of the process, known as the ASCII coordinator, is not working very close with the National Statistics Office. And for that, cognizant that the National Statistics Office is the custodian of national statistics, without their involvement is a serious matter indeed. And we haven't had a case in Mauritius where the National Statistics Office refused data on R&D to be submitted to AUD in Nepal before the quality was not proved. That will show you the benefit of that when you are supported by your National Statistics Office, recognizing the quality of research or innovation data. And by the same time, if you are not having this backup, then you are only on your own. You can even fail to respect some requirement when it comes to the sampling approach. And another opportunity is that some countries manage to cover all the 4 sectors for us to populate there. The gross domestic expenditure on R&D is very impossible for a country to have that there in case all the 4 traditional sectors performing R&D are not covered. And on top of that, even though a country can have all the 4 sectors covered, we also have the issue of extrapolation to make sure that the entire sector has been covered accordingly. We don't need just data from the sample to be presented. So on the one hand, if South Africa has been very robust, very long experience having it good, other countries, even though they can cover 4 sectors, you realize that for the business sector, they will not do extrapolation. And what is again tricky, when we are focusing on the business sector, we have to do the stratification because we have various strata as far as the international classification is concerned when it comes to the industry. And another aspect as well is the role of national economic communities in the West African region, ECOWAS. We have been supported by Dr. Roland Kwaku, who's the head of STI at ECOWAS. And in the SADC region, we have been supported by Annelien Morgan. By the time she has been leading STI before returning to the ministry in South Africa, DSTI. So that is also another opportunity so far when it comes to measurement. And also, we can also flag the issue of the African Union Specialized Technical Committee on Education, Science, and Innovation Statistics. We only had one meeting so far. We should have those meetings before the ministerial meeting. The STC, for us, is a plus, but still, we need to make sure that ADEA and other entities focusing on education statistics and ourselves, especially the observatory in Equatorial Guinea, as well as AUD-IATT, we team up together all the time to make sure that everything is under control. So far, Dr. Charles and distinguished participants, that's what I can say with regard to this question. Over to you.
Thank you. We still have 2 questions, so if you can keep the next 2 shorter, that would be great. Sorry, okay. So the next question is around capacity building, but also if you can link this to informal economy, which was mentioned quite a lot, what you're also doing in the area of developing indicators for the informal economy, that would be great. But the question here on capacity is trying to say what have you been, we know you're building capacity in this area, but what have been still the difficulty in over innovation outlook 1, 2, 3, 4, we still see gaps. And so how has the work responded to the gap in this area? Really, whether individual capacity building, you've covered some of them, but what has happened when some of the institutions is a one-man show and things like, so what are we approaching, or what is the future for this? Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. When we started the initiative, number 1, we focus more on regional training. And that time, member state has been supportive, and also we had a traditional partner, Sweden. What happened? We discovered.
I'm sorry, the connection is really getting lost now.
We lost you a bit, okay?
2007 to 2010. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're back.
Can you hear me now?
Go ahead, you're back.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was saying that when we started ASTI phase 1, from 2007 to 2010, we focused mainly on regional trainings, having 2 officials per country. But that was not very helpful. And when we moved to phase 2, from 2010 to 2014, we focused mainly on in-country training workshops. And in-country training workshop did help us a lot because we could reach up to 140 officials in Algeria, even up to 80 officials in Egypt. That was something very, very good. And also, just to alert you that we went beyond 3,500 officials trained so far since the inception of ASTI. And another aspect is that we have the Science Granting Council initiative that could not replace ASTI, because just to capacitate countries to have institutions that could manage the budget when it comes to government investment in R&D accordingly. And beyond that, we also have the issue of the informal sector. That is a survival economy in cases where some of our countries are having more than 80% of those who are in the business sector coming from the informal sector. Like Zimbabwe, we know the past of Zimbabwe, a country that has been punished. And to survive, we discovered that even a publication funded by USAID, more than 80% of firms were operating under the informal sector. And for us, we believe, as part of the new work package in terms of measuring science, technology, innovation, mainly research and innovation, it was important to focus on the informal sector. And Dr. Victor Conde and Dr. Chauna Mangwende has been very vocal in that. We piloted the process, and Dr. Almami Conte in Senegal did it earlier already. So for us, we believe it's important to explore that component, and even the new head of STI at AUD-IATT is really pushing for that. Over to you, Dr. Jackson.
Okay, we have very little time left, and then I'll need a minute to round up the session. But the last question around this, thank you for emphasizing the informal sector. The work we do in TIPSI, we actually focus on grassroots innovation a lot, social innovation, frugal innovation, how to capture them, but also how to shield and then help them upscale so that they can transform the system properly. So that is an important area. But the third question is around policy and impact. How the work you've been doing supporting this have actually led to what kind of impact can you explain to us that have been made? I think you've mentioned big number of people you have trained, number of 3,000 people, but since 2017, we've heard before from Abiodun and other colleagues how some of these approaches and frameworks are not institutionalized. So impact in terms of individual counting is good, but they're not changing the system quite robust in a way that the institutions actually begin to make proper arrangement at institutional level, transform either the policy side or the science side or the industry side, the 5 dimensions I've shown. So if you can share a little bit more on what those impacts have gone beyond the basic number counting, but also to systems change, that would be excellent. Thank you. Over to you. And then be quick about this, otherwise Minda will stop us.
Yes. Indeed, I'll be very quick. Number one, we just need to testify here that we are seeing a country like Eswatini, the Kingdom of Eswatini, and Kenya. They are about to establish their national observatory, just to show you that moving from the national focal point to have dedicated observatory, that's the way to go. We also understand the legacy in South Africa, where they have a dedicated entity sustaining the measurement at safety. That is already great. Since ASTI their target from 1% going beyond, because the minimum target we have been having for more than 40 years, it has been 1%. So we are seeing countries going beyond the 1%, even to 2% in their reverse policy, because they have been part of the evaluation. So those are the aspects that I'm flagging, not trying to be exhaustive because we have other cases, but in summary, those are some of the low-hanging
I think, Minda, we have lost Seke. That's a good time. So I just, so the key message from this session is really, while evaluation and the impact and collection on R&D
share with you, and also in Mali, we are seeing all those impacts are really something we have to flag.
Seke, we lost you a bit and I was already concluding, but thank you so much. We understand the struggles you've had to cope. We appreciate the effort you made. So just to round up the session, the point I was trying to make is why we look at this and collect data, it's important that we also have in mind that we're in the SDGs era where social issues are very important, inclusion, gender issues, but also environmental issues. So we need to be willing to move the evaluation we do to really systems level change and transformation as the SG encapsulate. Just increasing R&D to 1% or 2% or 5% without dealing with other components may not be the best approach for Africa. As we know, these are the informal economy, 80% are not doing formal R&D. So we need to look at a bit more indicators to support that. Thank you. Over to you, Minda.
Thank you, Seke, and thank you, Chucks. I see there's hands raised, but I would propose that we continue with the last 2 speakers. And then after the last speaker, we will have time for one more Q&A. In the meantime, feel free to use the chat to post your questions, because we'll be responding to those questions as well. The 8th presentation today is by Dimo. Dimo works for UNCTAD as an economist, and the floor is yours, Dimo.
Thank you. Can you hear and see me? All good? Thank you very much. Okay, so Chucks and some of the other colleagues and partners here will understand my pain when I start talking about challenges for STI policy evaluation. When we find out that we're doing national policy evaluation that has had no or very little monitoring. And it's a real big problem. It is a reality, and we cannot just drop it and say, well, too bad. We have to move forward with something, so we have something to build, so we have somewhere to grow from, and so we can start this process of improving and energizing the innovation system and so forth. So my discussion will be today about, so what do you do when none of these ideal situations exist? Somehow I always get to participate in doing national policy of countries that have very poor or non-existing monitoring, but still they need evaluation in order to carry on to the next 5 or 10-year policy cycle. So there is a policy need, a political need, and of course a development need, but we are at a very modest start. So let me see. Okay, so knowledge base. Just to explain to people why I feel comfortable talking about this. At UNCTAD, we do national policy reviews. We've done quite a few in the last 10 or so years. I've done 5 of them myself, but also provide advisory services on an ad hoc basis to various governments. The aim of these policy reviews, the objective is to strengthen the national innovation systems of the recipient countries. So that's the objective. They're done on request, so they are demand driven to a large extent. So the focus is assisting policymaking in STI. The situation we find, as I explained, was modest monitoring and evaluation processes, but new policy is being prepared or an existing one is being revised. And so I'd like to talk about these 4 things. First is, how do we actually conduct a policy evaluation in this type of situation? What do we do about the assessment of the national system of innovation? I will not talk about assessment of innovation performance because that's a rather lengthy issue, as well as the task of comparing policy goals and outcomes. I think there was a lot said about these 2 things in the current session and in the previous sessions. I will say a few words about how to move forward at the end. So, policy evaluation, assessment of NSI, no monitoring. What do we do? The first thing that I try to do when I engage with stakeholders in the country, was not myself only, but we usually work with a team of experts, including Chuck's. We've done this a couple of times, is to try to find out, is there a coherence of the STI policy under review with the national development strategy and with whatever sustainable development goals have been highlighted, some or all of them as possible development targets. One would think that there should be some harmony in all of this, but it is not always the case. It's about 50-50. But it determines the possibilities for further policy development and design and implementation. The more coherence there is with national level macro policy, development policy, the better. We need to look at that on the other side, we need to look at that grand national development strategy and policy, and to see that it itself recognize the whole STI complex. Some will recognize just the science parts, others will talk a lot about technology transfer, some will note innovation, but again, it's about 50-50. Most of them are incomplete in one or the other components, and quite a few of them underestimate the innovation component, which, as an economist and someone working in economic development, for me, this is the most important one because all the science and technology materializes, so it brings some kind of product, service, private sector on the market, but also from point of view of public service as well. This is where it kind of happens. This is where the citizens can touch, feel, taste, use whatever has come out of the S&T. It is in the innovation where it materializes. The other thing that we look in the STI policy is, does it reach out to other policy domains, or does it attempt to conduct its policy work? Does it attempt to frame its policy actions activities in a type of a silo. All of us know, working in for development in the developing world, but also in the very developed countries, that there is this tendency of bureaucracies and governments to silo themselves and work against reaching out. It's just too much, I think. I don't know how else to put it, but it is a arduous task, and we need to take an honest look and find out, is there an outreach to other policy domains? Very reasons why there may not be. I think most of you know most of them. The other thing is, we look at other policies who are nearby STI policy, industrial policy, education policy. We look at health policies and so forth, to see, do they acknowledge the science and technology, and particularly the innovation aspect of what they're doing. People will always say that, or sometimes, that STI is a cross the government type of policy domain, and therefore we need to see whether are they mentioned, are they noted in the other policy domains. We also need to see if the policies are somehow interrelated. We look at implementation matrices in the STI policy, but also in the other related or nearby policy domains. The question is who does what. If there's a lot of interaction in who does what among the various entities that carry the various mandates, that's a good thing. Even better if there's concrete collaboration with joint activities that are programmed, not only invited to participate, but actually developed jointly and implemented jointly. That's even better. We also look at a national system of innovation. And this is the question that I often ask to the stakeholders, and I ask them to think about this while we are working on the policy review. I ask them, do they use a national system of innovation framework for thinking about policy, for developing national level policy, specific policy instruments, and so forth. So because the national system of innovation, I've had long discussions about this with colleagues and friends in the field, and we somehow decided to redefine the national system of innovation as a conceptual framework, whereas the real thing in the field, when we go there, that we've started to call it the innovation ecosystem, just to distinguish between a way of thinking and formulating a policy with what do you actually find there in practice. So we ask ourselves, is anyone using an NSI framework to actually think about design policy? We asked the national stakeholders to map this national system of innovation, to actually take a big piece of paper and start thinking, who are the important stakeholders here? Are they public sector? Are they academia? Are they firms, industries? And where are there funding sources? Are there international donors involved? So all this type of questions, and trying to literally draw out with a pencil, what are the linkages in terms of where do funds flow from one part to the other? What are the reporting lines? Who reports to whom? And in this way, what one usually finds is this big spaghetti bowl of relationships, and there is a realization that it's very necessary to have some kind of a coordination mechanism at some level of formality. It can function without one, but it's better. And finally, another question we ask is, are there information gatekeepers? These are the bad guys in the national system of innovation. These are the people who, by restricting information flows because of their various positions in governance and government and so forth, disable horizontal, peer-based collaboration, transfer of tacit knowledge, and so forth. So the more these information keepers are, the worse things get usually, the more difficult it is to conduct these policy reviews. Of course, we look at reporting directions and information flows. And within the STI policy domain, also among the various stakeholders. Do the stakeholders outside of formal projects mandated collaborations, the directives from the minister and so forth. Do peers in governance, peers in STI policy, do they actually engage with each other outside of strict work assignments and designations? Finally, because there is very poor data, or the data is out of date, or one doesn't have a high level of confidence in the reliability of the data and so forth, we try to develop what we call a consensus narrative. So we interview a lot of people, 100 people for I think for Zambia, where Chucks and I worked together on the policy review. We had more than 70 stakeholder entities we had interviewed there, and which we asked through a discussion about what works and what doesn't. Usually what you find is that after about 20 or 30 discussions in a particular part of the STA policy domain, you start kind of figuring out there is a certain consensus about why things work, what works, why they don't, where are the challenges, and so forth. This discussion cannot replace data, but it does provide a lot of insight. The thing that is better than data is that it actually provides a narrative. I've always had a problem with collecting data in the field, in the developing world, and then bringing it back to the UN in Geneva, and then trying to develop a narrative. The narrative exists out there in the actual countries. You have the data, the data are the dots. Why would you want to displace yourself from the actual locality and then in abstract in an office try to connect the dots? You can always ask your counterparts, stakeholders, and the people who are working on this, struggling with this, being challenged by all sorts of problems. You should ask them to connect, to explain to you how the dots are connected. I find that I often get very interesting insights and really good explanations. So this question of causality for me is not a problem when I build consensus narratives, because the causality is implied in everyone's narrative that they share with you. So I don't have this anxiety over the narrative. But at the end of the day, it takes discussions with many diverse stakeholders. They include civil society, they include all kinds of interest groups and so forth. It includes creative people in arts and so forth. Everyone has a perspective. One needs to be very open-minded and try to engage with as many different and diverse stakeholders. So just a few more specifications on the first
Timo,
part.
just one more minute, please, because
Yes,
we
yeah,
really
I'm
need
finished.
to wrap it up.
This is the last thing. So, okay, coherency with national development strategy and SDGs. Is the policy under review a blueprint for a more sustainable future for all, or is it some kind of a niche thinking? And finally, what Chucks has been going on for quite a long time here with good intent and very correctly, is does the actual STA policy provide for directionality, reflexivity, and by consequence for transformative impact? We need to understand that all the key challenges that we're talking about these days, they're all interconnected, and this is what makes this policy domain relatively difficult. So, what to do, how to move forward? Well, Workstream 6 is here, UNIDO is here, SPRU is here, UNCTAD is here, UNEP, everyone is here. So stakeholders in national countries, they can always challenge us, ask for help and so forth. But on their side, national stakeholders need to understand that what we are going to help them do if they want to engage with us is understand and address an underlying policy process. So it's not a thing, a material thing. It's a policy is a human activity. It's not a physical, we're not building machines or something like that. The goals and objectives need to be defined at the national level. The mandated authority, they need to know what they're doing. We need to have this map of the national system of innovation, and there needs to be a strong sense of commitment in terms of timeline, funding, human resources at the national level in order for international organizations, UN, academic or institutions, so forth, in order to be able to help. So please, give us a shout and we'll see what we can do. I'm finished with my presentation. Hope it was a little bit insightful at the very least. So Mindel, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you very much, Dimo. Very insightful, actually. We now move to the last speaker. I already want to ask you for your patience and inform that we probably will run 5-10 minutes late, but I do not want to hold you from listening to the last speaker because it's valuable as well. So Fernando, the floor is yours, please. And I should say that there was connectivity issues where Fernando is in Brazil right now, so he had trouble. Can you speak, Fernando?
Yes, I can speak, but I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we hear you well.
And yeah, and then I don't know if it's gonna be stable. I mean, that's gonna be on and off. It's been like this for every few seconds. Let me just, in the interest of time, try to see, and hopefully when I share this.
Okay, this won't work. I'm sorry. This will not work. So then why don't we agree that we're gonna upload the presentation of Fernando with all the other materials on the drive, and instead we move to the Q&A session. Fernando, I'm sorry, but the connectivity seems to be no.
Can you hear me there? No.
It's on and off, Fernando. No, let's not do that. Let us go to the Q&A session, and then I would want to give the floor to Mr. or Mrs. Regis Mulea. Mr. or Mrs. Mulea, do you have a question?
I would suggest you just because the connection is very unstable.
Yes, Fernando, we stopped with your talk. So,
yeah,
we're gonna move into
worry,
the Q&A session, and we will upload your presentation on the website, if that's okay.
Yeah, fine. Thanks. Sorry about the one.
No worries. I invite all the panelists to join us on the screen, and I see that Mr. or Mrs. Mulea has the hand raised. Please raise your question.
Mulea says no question. There is a respondent on chat. So you can go to the next person.
Okay, so then this is an open invitation to the floor. If you have a question, raise your hand, please. No questions? Then I will get back to Dimo. Dimo, did you... Oh, here I see a question from Dr. Devasurendra. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Now, another thing is this, right? Now, listen, now this is an effort by UNCTAD. There has been this kind of efforts for a long, long time now. How many success stories do we have among these countries that are struggling to come out of this? Now, the thing is this, my point is this kind of thing normally happens through an initiative that comes from within the country, through some leadership that arises within the country. Now you can take, I don't want to name countries, but all of you know, right? The countries who have come out of the mess, right? But the countries are in a mess and they remain in the mess forever. And there are consultations, there is, sort of money being made, lots of money being made within and from without. and to no effect because proof of the pudding is in the eating, right? And out of the 200 odd UN countries, the kind of countries that are out of the mess are, maybe 20, even less, right? 20, I'm trying to be generous, right? Because the thing is, you can't have this kind of divide, right? People, what do you do about this? It's kind of generate leaders within these countries so that they can find their path and, kind of find their way out. But I don't think people can kind of guide their way out of the mess. That's not the way the history has taught us, right?
Okay.
From Greek time, from the from the very old Indian times, that's not the way it happened. It will never happen that way. So we are kind of misleading people a lot. And I feel sad about this, but you see, I'm an
Okay,
old
so let's go to the panelists and see who potentially has a more positive response to this.
And it's going to be a non-starter forever. But let's find some way out of this, please. Right?
Okay.
That's my question. Very general, very
Thank
vague.
you. Thank you for the question. Let's see who of the panelists has a slightly more positive perspective to this. Can I give the floor to Chucks, please?
Okay. Thank you. It's a question for UNCTAD, so I will open Dimo will respond. But
sorry,
the
Dimo.
response this response from my side is very good. I wanted to
Big
respond.
UNCTAD friend.
One of the way to think of it is the change we're having or the impact we're having are not deep enough. This is an actual problem. So we have systems that, which is why the SDG was being developed. We have systems that are producing wealth, but they're not distributing. We have systems that are producing a lot of research, but is not addressing the 50%, 80% informal economy situation. So there are systems we already have in existence that are producing some of this inequality we see, some of the result we're seeing. So if we don't like these results are not coming out just by these basic level things. So many of the change, many of the impact we see, or many of the work we're doing are still remaining on the surface level, not dealing with the system that reproduce some of these negative aspects or externalities, we call them. So for that to happen, you really want to look at how policies are done. We've heard many times now, policy, for example, many of them don't, including African Union, they didn't have an implementation framework. We heard that on the first day, on the first TISA. So now they're trying to change that. So how do you really look at the depth of the change that is happening? So if we continue to focus on the things that are not going to lead us to where we saw from the presentation of impact, how do we look at the impact? So it's really changing what we measure, because what we measure, it then influences as well what we then focus on. So what we measure is quite important. So and what we learn from that. So how do we front end the 80, 50 or whatever 90% we've heard a few times now of the informal economy, which is driving and creating the jobs? And how do we ensure that innovation actually produces different kind of outcomes? So that's the point. That's the direction I will respond to that. There is a lot of work, you said. We all recognize that there's a lot of activities happening. There's a lot of incentives. There's a lot of funding happening, but they're not going deep enough to the system to actually change the system that enable some of these outcomes we don't want, which are not leading us to the direction we want, the point on directionality. So we can invest in R&D differently. We can invest in, and then we need to measure it differently. So not just the quantity, but also the quality of what we're doing. So the systems, the innovation system need to then be redesigned or reconfigured. We're not saying it must be radical. There may be incremental approaches that happen, but eventually it can then lead to some radical change at the end.
Thank you. Thank you, Chucks. Sorry, Dimo, I did not mean to ignore you. So maybe the question, this is then the last question that we're going to do today, is from Louise Sibomana. Please, Louise, the floor is yours. Louise, are you with us?
There's also a question on the chat from on Liberia.
That's the one I also saw. That's actually one that Dimo, you might want to respond to.
Okay, but Louis' hand is up still.
Let's give Louis. Louis, please, your channel is open. Please, if you.
But you will need to unmute.
Yes. Let's unmute Louis. Mute permission.
Okay, I think now it's okay.
Now it's okay.
Yes,
yes please.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Very good.
Actually, the question is, I'm not who specific to answer this, but maybe Seki and other team can. We know that when we want to measure R&D, when to measure innovation, there are some accepted standardization tools to evaluate and measure them. But my question is, especially when we want to measure the maybe socio-economic impact. For instance, for the emerging technologies, are there some of maybe standardized tool to measure this socio-economic impact? Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. If I have to respond to that, number one, on the continent, we have what we call the African Union High-Level Panel on Emerging Technologies. And we understand that those technologies have the positive side and the negative one, but those are 10 eminent scholars on the continent, advising countries, if they feel that they need to accelerate their development, they can make use of them. And we call them emerging technology because they are radical technological innovation. They could be process or products. So for us to do the social impact assessment of that, we only have the aspects where we are getting feedback from the panel with some white paper and some guidance on some of them, gene drive, robotic, artificial intelligence, all those aspects, or Internet of Things. We already had a few reports. But to assess the impact, I think it's up to some of the entities within the countries, at least to see so far after adopting them, if they got some good result. And finally, let me conclude here. We have the case of cervical cancer in Uganda. One of the eminent scholar, part of the panel, Dr. William Waswa, he developed that to help ladies using big data through artificial intelligence. So we could see already that in the field of health, there is something very positive happening. And under the AUE innovation agenda, we also have this precision medicine. There is a possibility for us at least to use them accordingly. So it's up to the African Union member states to implement some of those technologies and to use some of the framework we have on the continent, CISA 2024, as well as the AUE innovation agenda to at least benefit from those. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Seka. That was very clear. Okay, so for now, we're going to close the Q&A session. I would like to also thank the last speakers, Dr. Seka and Chucks and Dimo, and also Fernando, even though connectivity was failing on us. And I would like to invite you to do the last Mentimeter question on your takeaway of the training. And after we've seen your input, we will move into what we thought was the takeaway of the training and some next steps. So maybe I can give Abi the floor to respond a little bit to what comes out of the takeaway messages.
Yes, thank you, Mindel. So far, I'm looking at 2 responses. I'm guessing this respondent was going to say national well-being, because I'm looking at national well. We can only infer from that, right? One way or another is going to be positive. But one striking point here, which I believe is going to resonate with most of the participants today and also the speakers, is the necessity of capacity building at the national level. And I think it connects very nicely with the point Seke was making and Nukovi was making about you know, AU member states and of course countries across developing regions to, you know, look inwards and isolate the impact of whatever they are doing. I mean, it's a responsibility, shared responsibility I'm looking at there. And the need for structures, for depth, I think is quite clear from the responses that I'm looking at here. And of course, M&E frameworks are more important now than ever. So I don't know if I can't see any new response coming from here. So that kind of summarizes it, you know.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
This is nice. Thanks so much. Let me then move to the responses that we had as a team after preparing this this session. Sengmei, if you could stop sharing and I can start sharing the last slides on our end. Thank you. Okay, so I think you now see the takeaway points that we as a team wrote down. And I'm not going over all of them anymore, but in session 1, which started last week, Monday, we agreed that STI has great potential, but we're not reaching the potential. At the same time, it is not a one-size-fits-all solution. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, and the countries are very diverse also across the continent. And we require a mix of capabilities, analytical capabilities, operational, political, in order to get to good policies. For the main takeaway of session 2, which was last week, Wednesday, more or less concluded the same. It was on the instruments. There's lots of policy instruments that we can use. Again, it's very specific which instruments are the ones that we need to focus on for particular problems to be zoomed in on. And the African experience, again, is very diverse. Key challenges lie in the implementation phase and funding phase, and there's a need to build awareness as well. So I think that pretty much aligns with the pointers that we just saw in the Mentimeter. For today, I suppose that the main takeaways that we take from the session today is that monitoring, even though it's happening broadly over the continent, still needs to be systematically integrated in institutions. Evaluation is less often practice as of yet, but would be very useful to start engaging in also institutionally, because actually we're evaluating for the purpose to understand how good we are achieving our goals with the policies and the policy instruments that we implement. We're not doing the policy cycle you see on the right to just do the policies. We do policies in order to reach development, in order to increase inequalities, in order to understand if we're spending the public funds well. So the red arrow that you see in the policy cycle on the right-hand side is actually very essential. And we need to be aware of that STI policy is implemented for the sake of sustainable development for all. We found that key hurdles were informality, were lack of capacity, were funding, and we kind of zoomed in on some of the sessions today. And I think we had very nice examples from the African research institutions that joined us from the speakers from the institutions to give some of the contextual knowledge. What I would like to conclude with is that, as you've seen in the chat, we will share all of the resources, also the links that we added in the chat. We will share those on the website of the IATT team. So it will not happen today, but in the progress of the next 1 or 2 weeks, we will update all of the resources on the website. The link is in the chat for now. We also have an evaluation form. You can reach that with this QR code, but we also will share that with everyone that signed up to the training. And in that evaluation form, we seek your input and your advice on what we can do to help you better. But we also would like to hear from you if there is specific ways that you think we can help your institution to move forward. So please feel free to use the QR code. As an IATT group, we're going to take the responses and we will look at the right institution to help you to get back to you with that information. And then I guess the last point that I want to make is a thank you to all of the speakers today. Your input was much appreciated, and thanks for the audience to have stayed with us. We hope the session was useful, and we will get back to you with future activities once we have a broader calendar for implementations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Minda.
Thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, Mindel. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mindo. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Chooks, this is not the time and place, but you know we need to catch up.
I thought
Well,
we
this
were
might
not
be
going
the
to
time
say
and
that.
place.
You see, he was laughing. He was laughing even before I finished that sentence. He knows what he has done.
I still made sure they invited you. At least we see in different places, even if not bilateral. We'll have to do bilateral. But Minda, thanks for coordinating. So we're here.
Thank you.
But
Thank
this is
you.
very important. Thank you, everybody, for joining, making